The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot against the Texas stone, and Margaret Whitfield knew her luck had finally run out. The driver cursed, spitting tobacco into the dust as he surveyed the splintered wood. 3 days from Fort Griffin, 2 days to the Dalton Ranch, where she was promised as a mail-order bride to a man she'd never met. And now this. The October sun blazed mercilessly overhead, turning the prairie into a shimmering inferno. "Can't fix it," the driver muddled, not meeting her eyes. "Settlement's a day's walk back. You got money for a new wheel?" Margaret's fingers closed around the silver locket at her throat, her mother's last gift before the fever took her 6 months ago. It was all she had left of her old life in Philadelphia, all that remained after her father's debts scattered her family like autumn leaves. The advertisement had seemed like providence. Respectable rancher seeks educated woman for marriage. Room and board provided. She'd sold everything but this locket to afford the journey west. If you're enjoying this tale, I'd be grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. Thank you so much. "I have this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as she unfastened the chain. The silver caught the light, dancing with memories of her mother's smile. The driver reached for it, but a shadow fell across them both. Margaret looked up into the face of a man on horseback, a Comanche warrior whose presence seemed to pull the very air taut around him. He was perhaps 30 years old, with long black hair bound with leather and beadwork, his copper skin marked with the white scars of a warrior. His eyes, dark as midnight, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That locket won't buy you water out here," he said in perfect English, his voice low and steady. "But I have water, food, and I know these lands." The wagon driver scrambled backward. "Now see here, we don't want no trouble." "There is no trouble," the warrior said, not breaking eye contact with Margaret. "Only a woman who needs help, and a man offering it freely." He swung down from his paint horse with fluid grace, pulling a water skin from his saddle. "I am Nakota of the Pennateca. My ranch is half a day's ride north. You can rest there until your transportation is arranged." Margaret's hand tightened on the locket. Every warning she'd heard about savage Indians echoed in her mind, yet his eyes held none of the cruelty she'd seen in the Philadelphia men who'd circled her father's bankruptcy like vultures. Only a clear, direct honesty that made her own fear feel small and foolish. "I'm expected at the Dalton Ranch," she said, lifting her chin. "Mr. Dalton paid for my passage." Something flickered in Nakota's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or distaste. Miles Dalton. It wasn't a question. That man collects wives the way other men collect cattle. His last 3 mail-order brides ran away within a year. He held out the water skin. "But the choice is yours. Wait here in the heat with a broken wagon and a driver who's already eyeing the road back to town, or accept help from someone who asks nothing in exchange." The driver was indeed backing toward his horse, leaving her trunk in the dust. Margaret took the water skin with trembling fingers, the weight of her situation crushing down like the Texas sky. She drank deeply, the water cool and sweet, tasting of some herb she didn't recognize. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Nakota's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "Because you're holding that locket like it's your last piece of the world. I know what it's like to lose everything." He gestured to the horse. "And because no woman should be property, traded for passage money." The words struck something deep in her chest. You're not property. How long since anyone had spoken to her as a person with choices, not a burden to be disposed of? I can ride, she said, though she'd only ever ridden side saddle in Philadelphia's parks. Then we leave now, before the heat gets worse. Nakota lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, securing it behind his saddle. He offered his hand to help her mount. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady as he lifted her onto the horse's back. When his hands touched her waist to settle her in the saddle, she felt the restrained strength in his fingers, power held carefully in check. The driver had already disappeared down the trail, a plume of dust marking his retreat. "Hold tight," Nakota said, swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Margaret felt the solid heat of his chest against her back. "We ride fast for the first hour, until we're clear of this exposed ground." The horse moved beneath them like liquid muscle, and Margaret's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the sage-scented wind, and the steady presence of the man behind her. She'd crossed an ocean of prairie to become a stranger's wife, but she'd never expected to feel safer in the arms of a man called Savage than in the promises of civilized society. They rode in silence through a landscape that seemed to stretch into infinity. The prairie grass whispered secrets in the wind, and hawks circled overhead in lazy spirals. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, Nakota guided the horse up a rise. Below, a valley opened up like cupped hands, and Margaret saw his ranch, a sturdy cabin of weathered wood, a barn, corrals where horses grazed, and beyond it all, a creek that caught the dying sunlight like molten silver. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's survival." Nakota said, but she heard the pride underneath. "My father was Comanche, my mother the daughter of a French trapper. I walk between worlds, belonging fully to neither. This land is the only place I'm just myself." He helped her down at the cabin, his hands again careful and respectful. Inside, the space was sparse but clean. A stone hearth, a simple table and chairs, shelves lined with books that surprised her, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters that filled the air with earthy sweetness. "You read?" she asked, moving toward the books. "My mother taught me. She believed education was armor against ignorance." He knelt to build a fire. "There's a room in back. It's yours while you're here. I sleep in the barn this time of year anyway. Cooler." Margaret turned to him, this man who'd appeared like something from a fevered dream, and felt the world tilting beneath her feet. "You're giving me your home?" "I'm giving you a choice," he corrected, striking flint to tinder. Sparks bloomed into flame. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, I'll take you to Dalton's ranch if that's still what you want. Or I'll take you back to Fort Griffin to catch a stage east. Or," he paused, feeding kindling to the growing fire, "you can stay here, work for your keep, cooking, mending, whatever skills you have. I pay fair wages. At the end of a month, you'll have enough for passage anywhere you want to go." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Nakota stood, and in the firelight, his face held shadows and copper highlights. "Because strangers showed my mother kindness when my father's people rejected her for marrying outside the tribe. Because I see a woman worth saving, not from life, but for it." He moved toward the door. "There's venison stew on the hearth, bread in the cupboard. Tomorrow comes soon enough for decisions." Alone in the cabin that smelled of sage and wood smoke, Margaret sank into the single wooden chair and pressed her hands to her face. She'd expected hardship, loneliness, perhaps even brutality in her new life. She hadn't expected this, an offer of sanctuary with no demands attached, from a man whose steady gaze made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced. The locket lay cool against her throat, her mother's face forever young behind the silver. "What would you tell me to do, Mama?" But she knew. Her mother had defied her own family to marry a poor Irish dock worker, had chosen love over security, even though it had ended in poverty and early death. Margaret ate the stew, rich with wild onions and herbs, and felt strength seeping back into her bones. Through the window, she could see Nakota in the barn, moving among the horses with easy grace. A man who walked between worlds, he'd said. She understood that now. She was between worlds herself, suspended between the life she'd lost and the life she'd been sold into. And suddenly a third path had opened before her like an unexpected creek in the desert. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of horses and the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly in her one remaining decent dress, pale blue cotton that had seen better days, and emerged to find Nakota at the stove, working a cast-iron skillet with practiced efficiency. "You cook?" she asked. "When a man lives alone, he learns or he starves." He glanced at her, and she saw the corner of his mouth lift. "But if you know how to make biscuits that don't break teeth, I won't complain about the help." They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side in the morning light. Margaret mixed flour and lard, while Nakota fried eggs and salt pork. Their hands brushed once as they both reached for the same knife, and the contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. Over breakfast, Nakota laid out the day's work. "The north fence needs mending. Horses got through last night. I need to ride out and drive them back. You can come if you'd like, or stay here and rest. There's a garden out back that needs weeding if you're inclined." "I'll come," Margaret said immediately. The thought of staying alone felt suddenly unbearable, though she couldn't have said why. He nodded, stood, and collected their plates. "Can you really ride, or were you being brave yesterday?" "Both," she admitted. "I rode as a girl, but only gentle horses in city parks." "Then I'll teach you to ride like this land requires." He moved to the door, then paused. "But first, you need different clothes. A dress'll get you killed out here, caught on thorns, tangled in stirrups. Wait here." He disappeared into the back room and returned with worn leather breeches, a cotton shirt, and a vest. "These were my mother's. She was about your size." Margaret took the clothes, feeling the softness of well-worn leather. "I couldn't. These are precious to you." "Memories are in my heart, not in cloth." His dark eyes held hers. She would have wanted them used, not gathering dust. She was practical that way. In the privacy of the back room, Margaret changed, feeling strange and free in the men's clothing. The breeches fit well enough, the shirt loose and comfortable. When she emerged, Nakota's expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes before he shuttered it away. "Better," he said gruffly. "Now you won't break your neck trying to ride side saddle through rough country." He led her to the corral where a dozen horses milled. "This is Sage," he said, gesturing to a gray mare with gentle eyes. "She was my mother's favorite, patient, smart, won't spook easy." He saddled the horse with quick, efficient movements, then turned to Margaret. "Mount up. I'll adjust the stirrups." Margaret put her foot in the stirrup and swung up. Awkward, but she made it. Nakota's hands were gentle as he shortened the stirrups, his fingers careful not to linger on her legs, though she felt the warmth of each brief contact like brands. Good, he said, stepping back. Now, out here, you don't ride with just your hands. You ride with your whole body, your legs, your balance, your breath. The horse feels everything. Show her respect, and she'll carry you through hell itself. They rode out into the morning, and Nakota began her education in survival. He showed her how to read the land, where water might hide beneath dry creek beds, which plants were safe to eat and which would poison, how to track animals by their signs. His knowledge was vast and given freely, without condescension. "How do you know all this?" Margaret asked, as they paused at a ridge overlooking his property. "My father taught me to read the earth before my mother taught me to read books." Nakota's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon. "He died when I was 14. Killed in a raid by Texas Rangers who didn't care that he'd done nothing wrong except be Comanche. My mother brought me here, to this land her father left her, and we built a life between her world and his. I'm sorry," Margaret said softly, "for your loss. Loss shapes us." He looked at her then, really looked, his dark eyes seeing past her surface. "I think you know something about that. My mother died 6 months ago. Cholera." The words still hurt to say. "My father died inside when she did. Drank himself into debts we couldn't pay. My brother joined the army. My sister married a merchant and moved west. I was the youngest, the unmarried one. The burden." "You're not a burden," Nakota said, and the quiet conviction in his voice made her throat tighten. "You're a person who drew an unlucky hand. That's not the same thing." They found his horses, grazing in a meadow beyond the broken fence. And Nakota taught her how to approach them, how to move with confidence, but without aggression. Together they drove the small herd back through the fence line, and Margaret felt something unfurl in her chest, a wild, bright feeling she couldn't name. The fence repair took the better part of the afternoon. Nakota worked with his shirt sleeves rolled up, and Margaret found her eyes drawn to the play of muscle beneath copper skin. The white scars that marked his arms, evidence of a warrior's past. He caught her watching once and smiled, slow and knowing, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. "Hand me that wire," he said, and she did, their fingers brushing. The contact lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. "You said you walk between worlds," Margaret said, as he worked. "Do you ever wish you belonged completely to one or the other?" "Every day," he admitted, "and never. To my father's people, I'm too white. To the white settlers, I'm too Indian. But this land," he gestured to the vast prairie around them, "doesn't care about blood quantum or where your mother was born. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive and humble enough to learn." "Is that why you helped me? Because you understand what it's like to be caught between worlds?" Nakota straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "I helped you because when I saw you trying to trade your last precious thing for survival, I saw my mother 20 years ago. Alone, scared, but too proud to beg. Someone helped her. I don't forget debts, even ones that aren't mine to repay." They worked until the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. As they rode back to the cabin, Margaret felt the ache of honest labor in her muscles, and something else, a contentment she'd never known in Philadelphia's drawing rooms. That evening, she insisted on making supper while Nakota tended the horses. She found vegetables in the garden, tomatoes, squash, peppers, and made a simple stew with the venison he'd smoked. When he came in, his hair damp from washing at the creek, he paused in the doorway. "Smells good," he said quietly. They ate together as stars emerged in the darkening sky, and for the first time since her mother's death, Margaret didn't feel alone. They talked about books. He'd read Shakespeare and Whitman, surprising her with his education. She told him about Philadelphia, about the narrow streets and narrower minds, about how she'd always felt trapped by expectations. And now, he asked, do you still feel trapped? Margaret looked at him across the table, this man who'd offered her freedom without demands, and felt something shift in her heart, a lock turning, a door opening. No, she said. Now I feel like I'm finally breathing. The days fell into a pattern. Margaret worked alongside Nakota, learning the rhythms of ranch life. He taught her to shoot, placing his hands over hers to adjust her grip on the rifle, his breath warm against her ear as he murmured instructions. The first time she hit the target, his smile was bright as sunrise. "You're a natural," he said. "Better aim than half the men in the territory." She learned to track game, to treat a horse's injuries, to read weather in the clouds, and slowly, carefully, they learned each other. She discovered that Nakota sang while he worked, old Comanche songs his father had taught him, the words strange and beautiful. He had a scar on his ribs from a grisly encounter at 16, and he loved coffee strong enough to strip pate. He learned that Margaret could recite poetry from memory, that she sketched in charcoal when paper was available, that she had nightmares sometimes, waking with gasping cries from dreams of her father's raging drunk or her mother's final fevered hours. The first time it happened, Nakota appeared at her door, half-dressed and alert. "Are you hurt?" "Just dreams," she managed, trembling. "I'm sorry I woke you." "Don't apologize for pain you didn't choose." He hesitated in the doorway, lamplight casting him half in shadow. "My mother used to make tea, chamomile and valerian. It helps with the nightmares." "May I?" She nodded, and he moved to the hearth, building up the fire and setting water to boil. They sat together in the firelight, not speaking, just sharing the silence. When the tea was ready, he handed her the cup, their fingers brushing. "Thank you," she whispered. "We all carry ghosts," he said. "The trick is not letting them drive the wagon." As weeks passed, the space between them became charged with unspoken things. Margaret would catch Nakota watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. He would find reasons to touch her, adjusting her hat in the sun, steadying her when she stumbled, his hands lingering just a moment too long. One evening, as they worked together, preparing supper, Margaret reached for a pot at the same moment Nakota did. They collided, and suddenly she was pressed against his chest, his arms coming up to steady her. For a breathless moment, they stood frozen, her hands on his shoulders, his hands at her waist. She could feel his heartbeat through the thin fabric of his shirt, thundering like her own. "Margaret," he said, her name rough in his throat. "Yes?" She couldn't look away from his eyes, dark and deep as the night sky. "If you stay much longer, you need to know." He stopped, jaw tightening. "I made a promise to myself after my mother died. No attachments. This life is too hard, too uncertain. I wouldn't ask a woman to share it." "I'm not asking you to ask me anything," Margaret said, though her heart was pounding. "I'm just here. You're not just anything." His hands tightened on her waist, then released as he stepped back, and she felt the loss of his warmth like a wound. "You should know that Miles Dalton came by 3 days ago, asking if I'd seen his mail-order bride. I told him no." Margaret's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I saw the bruises on his last wife's arms at the trading post. Because men who pay for women in advertisements don't want partners. They want property." His eyes burned into hers. Because she was promised to a rancher, but her soul recognized the Comanche who rescued her. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Margaret's hand went to her locket, her mother's face behind the silver. She thought of the life she'd been traveling toward, a loveless marriage to a brutal man, decades of quiet suffering. And she thought of this man before her, who'd shown her more respect and kindness in 3 weeks than she'd known in her entire life in Philadelphia. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. "Not unless you tell me to go." Something fierce and bright flashed in Nakota's eyes. "I won't tell you that. I couldn't." He reached up, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "But I need you to understand what staying means. This land is hard. Winters are brutal. I have enemies, white ranchers who want my land, Comanche who see me as a traitor. Life here will never be easy or safe." "Life nowhere is safe," Margaret said, leaning into his touch. "At least here I'm choosing it." "Together," he said softly, as if testing the word. "If we do this, we do it together. Equal partners. I won't own you, Margaret. I want to stand beside you." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a vow. He kissed her then, soft and careful as if she might break. But when she pressed closer, her fingers tangling in his long hair, the kiss deepened, became something fierce and claiming. He tasted of coffee and wood smoke, and something wild she couldn't name. And when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "I should court you properly," he said, voice rough. "Ask permission, bring gifts." "You gave me water in the desert," Margaret said, touching his face. "You gave me choice when I had none. You gave me myself back. What gift could matter more than that?" But peace, Margaret learned, was a fragile thing in the West. 2 weeks later, she was alone at the cabin, Nakota having ridden to Fort Griffin for supplies. She was kneading bread when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Through the window, she saw 5 riders approaching, white men, hard-faced, with guns at their hips. The leader was a bear of a man, with a beard gone gray and eyes like chips of flint. Miles Dalton. Margaret's heart lurched, but she forced herself to walk calmly to the door. She'd learned to shoot, learned to stand her ground. She would not cower. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she called from the porch, keeping her hand near the rifle Nakota had insisted she keep always within reach. Dalton's smile was all teeth. "Well now, there's my missing bride. Thought that half-breed was lying when he said he hadn't seen you. Been looking for you, Mrs. Dalton." "I'm not Mrs. Dalton," Margaret said evenly. "I never made it to your ranch, and I have no intention of doing so now." "You took my money for passage," Dalton said, swinging down from his horse. His men followed, fanning out. "That makes you mine until I say different. I owe you money then. I'll repay you." Margaret's fingers closed on the rifle. "But I'm not your property." "Funny how you're wearing that savage's mother's clothes," one of the men sneered. "Everyone knows what that means." Dalton's face darkened. "Been keeping company with the breed? Lying with him?" He spat. "That makes you damaged goods, girl. But I'm feeling charitable. Come along now, and I'll only beat you half to death for the disrespect." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Margaret raised the rifle and was gratified to see Dalton pause. "Leave, or I'll put a hole in you." "You think you can shoot all 5 of us, girl?" Dalton laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. "I only need to shoot you," Margaret said, sighting down the barrel at his chest. "And I will." They stood in tense silence, and Margaret felt sweat trickle down her spine, despite the cool morning. She'd shot targets, yes, But could she shoot a man? To save herself, to protect the life she was building here. Yes, she could. The standoff broke with the thunder of hoofbeats. Nakota appeared around the barn like something from a war painting, riding low and fast, his rifle already in hand. He pulled up beside Margaret, swinging down without breaking his aim on Dalton. "You're on my land," he said, voice deadly calm. "Threatening a woman under my protection. Give me one good reason not to shoot you where you stand." "Protection?" Dalton sneered. "That's a pretty word for." The crack of Nakota's rifle split the air, and Dalton's hat flew off his head. The men scrambled for their guns, but Nakota had already reloaded with movements too fast to follow. "Next one goes between your eyes," Nakota said. "Margaret's not your bride. She owes you nothing. You have 10 seconds to get off my land before I decide you're trespassing and solve this problem permanently." "The law," one of the men started. "The law doesn't care about mail-order brides who change their minds," Nakota cut in. "And it definitely doesn't care about men who threaten women with violence. Now you can leave on your horses, or you can leave in boxes. Your choice." Dalton's face was purple with rage, but he was facing a man with a rifle and a woman who'd proven she could shoot. He made the calculation Margaret could see in his eyes. "This isn't over," he snarled. "No half-breed keeps what's mine." "Never was yours," Nakota said. "Now ride." They rode, but the threat in Dalton's parting glance made Margaret shiver. When the dust settled, Nakota turned to her, lowering the rifle. "Are you hurt?" "No." Margaret realized she was shaking. "I was ready to shoot him. I would have." "I know." Nakota pulled her close, and she felt his heart pounding as hard as hers. "I'm sorry I left you alone. I won't make that mistake again. You couldn't have known." She pressed her face to his chest, breathing in his scent, leather and sage and safety. "But Nakota, he'll come back. He won't let this go." "No," Nakota agreed grimly. "Men like Dalton don't. But by then, you won't be a mail-order bride he can claim. You'll be my wife, and he'll have to answer to me if he so much as looks at you wrong." Margaret pulled back to look at him. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a fact," he said, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "I love you, Margaret Whitfield. Loved you from the moment you tried to trade your last treasure for water rather than beg. Marry me. Not because of Dalton, not for protection, but because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life and see your face. Because you make me believe in futures I'd given up on. Because together, we're stronger than anything this land can throw at us." "Yes," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Nakota. You gave me back my life, and I want to spend it with you." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and she clung to him like he was the earth itself. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were bright with something that looked like hope. "We'll ride to Fort Griffin tomorrow," he said. "Find the circuit judge, make it legal and binding, and then we'll come back here and build a life that's ours, not anyone else's." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. That night, Margaret woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, disoriented, then heard Nakota shouting her name. She ran to the main room and saw flames licking up the outside wall, spreading fast in the dry wood. "Out the back!" Nakota yelled, already gathering what he could. His mother's rifle, the deed to the land, a bag of essential supplies. Margaret grabbed her trunk, but he pulled her away. "No time! Move!" They burst out the back door as the front wall collapsed in a shower of sparks. In the firelight, Margaret saw riders circling, Dalton's men, watching to make sure they couldn't save the cabin. Nakota shoved her toward the barn. "Get Sage in the paint. Ride for Fort Griffin. Don't stop. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Margaret shouted. "You have to." He pressed the deed into her hands. "If they kill me, this land goes to my nearest kin, some cousin I've never met who'll sell it to Dalton. But if you're my wife, it's yours. Ride to the fort, find the judge, tell him what happened. Promise me. Nakota, promise me." His eyes blazed with desperation. "I can't lose you like I lost everyone else. You're my future, Margaret, but only if you survive. Now go." Gunshots split the night. Nakota pushed her toward the barn, then turned to face the riders, his rifle spitting fire. Margaret ran, her heart tearing in two. She got the horses saddled with shaking hands, could hear the gunfight raging outside. Too many guns, too many men. She was leading the horses toward the back door when a figure appeared, silhouetted against the flames. Margaret raised the rifle she'd grabbed, ready to shoot, then recognized the beadwork on the buckskin. Comanche. "You are the one who lives with Nakota," the warrior said in halting English. He was young, perhaps 20, with the same dark eyes as Nakota. "I am Tashka, his cousin. I saw the fires from our camp." "They're killing him," Margaret gasped. "Dalton's men, there are too many." Tashka's face hardened. "Nakota walks alone because he chose the white world, but he is still blood." He turned and whistled, sharp and piercing. From the darkness beyond the burning cabin, more riders appeared. A dozen Comanche warriors, armed and ready. "We ride together," Tashka said. "You stay with horses. If Nakota dies, you take land to the fort like he wishes. But he will not die tonight." The warriors charged with ululating cries that raised the hair on Margaret's neck. Through the smoke and chaos, she could hear the sounds of battle, guns and arrows, screams of men and horses. She wanted to help, to fight, but she understood her role. Protect the future. Protect what Nakota was fighting for. It felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The shooting gradually died down, and then Tashka appeared, supporting Nakota between himself and another warrior. Nakota's shirt was dark with blood, his face pale with pain, but he was alive. "Nakota!" Margaret ran to him, tears streaming. "Where are you hurt?" "Shoulder. Graze on the ribs. Nothing fatal." His voice was tight with pain. "Dalton, wounded, rode off with his remaining men," Tashka said. He looked at Margaret with new respect. "You are brave to stay with my cousin, to choose this hard life." "I'm not brave," Margaret said, helping ease Nakota to the ground. "I'm just stubborn." She tore strips from her dress, pressing them to the wound in his shoulder. "Go slow," she warned as he tried to sit up. "It hurts." "I'll die before I hurt you," Nakota said through gritted teeth, and she realized he thought she meant he was hurting her by moving. "No, I mean your wound. Go slow, it hurts you," she clarified, and despite everything, he smiled. Tashka and his warriors helped them ride to Fort Griffin through the night. By the time dawn broke, painting the prairie in shades of rose and gold, they'd reached the settlement. The circuit judge took one look at the wounded man, the woman in torn clothes, and the Comanche escort, and listened to their story with a grim expression. "Dalton's been trouble for years," he said, "but he's got friends in high places, money to throw around. You'll need proof." "I have proof," Margaret said, showing the burns on her hands from saving what she could. "I have witnesses," she gestured to Tashka and his warriors. "And I have the deed to that land." We're getting married today, right now. So when Miles Dalton comes to claim what he thinks he owns, he'll find out exactly what he's up against." The judge looked at Nakota, who'd been stitched and bandaged by the fort doctor. "Son, you sure about this? White woman and a half-blood? You'll face trouble from both sides." "Been facing trouble my whole life, Judge," Nakota said, reaching for Margaret's hand. "This is the first time I've had something worth fighting for, beyond just survival." They were married in the judge's chambers, Margaret in her torn and soot-stained dress, Nakota with his arm in a sling, and Tashka and his warriors as witnesses. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Nakota kissed her gently, mindful of his wounds, and Margaret tasted salt. Her tears or his, she couldn't tell. "Together," she whispered against his lips. "Together," he agreed. They rebuilt the cabin that winter, working alongside Tashka and warriors who came and went, a bridge between Nakota's two worlds. Miles Dalton stood trial for arson and attempted murder, and though his money bought him light sentencing, the scandal destroyed his reputation. His ranch failed within a year. Margaret learned to speak Comanche, taught Tashka and his friends to read English. She drew pictures of the prairie and the people she'd come to love, and slowly, the space between worlds Nakota had walked alone became a place where two worlds met and mingled. 5 years later, Margaret stood on the porch of their new cabin, bigger now, with room for the children that would come. She wore her mother's locket and a Comanche beadwork necklace Tashka's wife had made for her. In the corral, Nakota was teaching their daughter to ride Sage, now old and gentle, and their son watched from his father's shoulders, laughing. Tashka rode up with news from the tribal camps. "The government wants to parley about reservation boundaries. They asked for you to translate, cousin. They trust you to speak true." Nakota looked at Margaret, question in his eyes. She nodded. "Go. We'll be here when you return. We'll always be here." That evening, as they lay together watching stars bloom in the darkening sky, Nakota traced the line of her jaw. "Do you ever regret it? Giving up the civilized world?" Margaret thought of Philadelphia's suffocating parlors, of the life she'd been fleeing toward with Miles Dalton, of the woman she'd been, lost and desperate, trying to trade her last treasure for mere survival. "I gave up nothing," she said, lacing her fingers with his. She was promised to a rancher, but her soul recognized the Comanche who rescued her. "You didn't save me, Nakota. You showed me I could save myself, and then you loved me while I learned how." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and in the distance, coyotes sang to the rising moon. This land was hard, would always be hard, but they'd chosen it together, built it together, and together they were strong enough to face whatever came. The silver locket at her throat caught starlight, and Margaret smiled. Her mother would have loved this life, would have loved Nakota, would have understood that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in accepting the life you're given, but in claiming the one you deserve. Together, they'd claimed it all: the land, the love, the hard-won peace. And tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, they'd wake up and choose it again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home? During your commute? Or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Margaret and Nakota's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.